I stood beside Richard in the kitchen of his 1830s farmhouse, pouring wine while he sautéed onions. When we raised our glasses, he asked me to marry him. He was kidding, sort of, but the question made my knees weak. I'd never imagined anyone asking me that question, let alone another man. And his playful proposal made me confront feelings I'd been avoiding. I loved him, and I wanted to share his life. Richard and I were in Budapest in July of 2011 when we learned the New York State Legislature had passed the Marriage Equality Act. Like gay people everywhere, we thought this was great news, though we had been oblivious to the legislation pending in Albany, just an hour north of our Hudson Valley home. We were like many of those who had rushed the midnight altar, a long-term good-as-married couple with many legal safeguards already in place, including documents we carried when traveling for work or pleasure, drafted to prevent one of those horror stories of a long-term companion being excluded from a hospital room by a formerly estranged next of kin. We imagined our civil ceremony would be a routine legality, like registering a car, and we wanted to keep things as simple as possible. It was something we'd do one weekday morning, witnessed by two friends who joined us to share a celebratory lunch. But after we applied for our marriage license and set the date, I realized I couldn't email our friends with the news without talking to my mother. At my first wedding, to a woman, I danced to a slow song with Mom, surrounded by guests with cameras. But now, at age 91, Mom was no longer dancing and was instead navigating the corridors of her senior residence in a wheelchair. Since her hip fracture, she'd been rolling herself to meals, to mass, and to her weekly appointment at the hair salon. I'd wanted to have a face-to-face talk with Mom about this for years, but I'd missed many opportunities and now had to make a very awkward phone call. It was high time. I told Mom I was gay. I'm the youngest of Mildred's 6 children, and sex wasn't discussed in our house. I never talked with Mom about being gay and never wanted to, figuring she already knew. Mom had always been fond of Richard, and she often raved about his great hospitality and cooking, but I sometimes wondered about her level of awareness. In our early years together, Mom referred to Richard as Eddie's friend, and once awkwardly as Eddie's boss. With my encouragement, she eventually began referring to him as Eddie's partner, a still ambiguous descriptive since we owned a business together. Was our obvious but undefined state somehow preferable to my mother? Was it important to me? Why hadn't I told her this years earlier? At 9 p.m., on the eve of my gay wedding, I paced with the phone in my hand, wondering if the news would shock or upset her, and if her response would upset me. And I struggled with what to say. I walked outside to look at the stars. I took a deep breath and I called. "Hi, Mom," I said, scanning the night sky. "I've got some interesting news to share with you. Remember last year when Governor Cuomo signed a law allowing gay New Yorkers to get married? Well, Richard and I are getting married tomorrow morning." "Oh, that's wonderful news, Eddie," she said, "and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. To tell you the truth, I sometimes wondered if you hadn't married already." I felt relieved and foolish and lighter somehow, a burden lifted. Of course she already knew. Mom said all the right things, acknowledging how nicely Richard and I got along and citing our shared interests. And Mom told me she loved me and that she loved Richard too. But there was just one thing that confused her, one piece that she could not wrap her head around. "Now, just what exactly does this make Richard to me?" she asked. "Is he my brother-in-law?"